I've been insanely sick for the past 3 or 4 days now, so hit that like button to wish me good health. Share this video somewhere if you want the sickness to become incurable and spread to the neighbors, thanks. While I'm on the road to recovery, here are some stories from your favorite magical place, full of cuddly fairy tale critters, the woods. If you haven't learned that them trees mean trouble, then you're as good as not alive. Sorry, YouTube. Can I keep my ads now? Enjoy these stories and excuse my fever-induced insanity. Remember to share your stories at reddit.com/r/darknessprevails for a chance to have them narrated. There was something outside my tent. From Sloth My Mango. This is a true story. It happened just last week as of posting this, and I've been looking for a place to tell this story. I live in Phoenix, and it's the summer, so my friends and I planned a trip to Fool's Hollow Lake in northeast Arizona. The camping site is serene. We were fortunate enough to get a spot right by the river, and luckily for us, we happened to be the only campers at that campsite. We set up our tent. Me being the genius that I am, I decided to set mine up near the entrance of the woods, isolated from my friends. I wanted to get out of the way of the wind stream, and this way I could give my friend and his girlfriend some space too. The first night goes fine, but there was something not right about this area. There was a shocking lack of wildlife in the area, minus a couple of squirrels that we'd seen we nicknamed Jeffrey and Dahmer. But even that was weird, because Dahmer was nearly twice the size of Jeffrey, and he would just stare at you if you looked in his direction. It was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen a squirrel do. But I shrugged it off as nothing more than kind of weird. We settled in for night 2. That's when things started to get worse. We all checked out around 8 p.m. since there wasn't really anything to do besides eat then sleep. It was night at that point, of course, and around 11:30 I woke up. It didn't take long for me to realize what had caused me to stir. There was a faint sound, like duct tape, unwrapping. That's a sound so unique it was unmistakable, but to hear it all the way out here, that's worrisome. I freeze up, thinking, why would anyone need duct tape in the middle of the woods in the middle of the night? There's not supposed to be anyone for miles near us. I tried to rationalize it as just a waking dream, but then I hear the slow rustle of leaves. Not very loud. It was as if someone was trying their best not to be heard. I quickly get my bear spray, and I stay as still as I can, listening for whatever comes next. I can hear them, clearly 2 sets of steps, one very close, and the other a slight distance away. My tent is a one-person tent and I'm 6'4", 20 years old, so to say I don't fit the look of my tent is an understatement. I can now see a silhouette of a man walking beside my tent, just outside. This is where things get bad. He doesn't try to hide as he glides his hand across my tent, teasing me, taunting me, trying to scare me. What still gets me to this day is the laugh that came next. The most demented and cruel-sounding laugh I'd ever heard. It was a laugh that meant to instill fear into his target. I'm in full flight or fight mode at this point, but I know I can't fight 2 men at once, so I lay back, pretending to still be sleeping, waiting for the very worst. The zipper slowly began to pull down on my tent, and then the second fly net layer. An older-looking man, possibly in his 50s, pops his head into my tent. To my horror, he's got a hunting knife in his hand. But apparently I was not his prime target. Through the small slit in my eyes, I don't think he knew I was awake, but I could see him looking me over. He was sizing me up. Maybe I was just intimidating enough, and decided that it was not in his best interest to mess with me. Or maybe I'm giving myself too much credit. Either way, he slowly eased away and zipped the tent back up. Thank God. I hear the guy and whoever he's with wander off. I think the worst is over, but little did I know the worst was yet to come. I wanted to let my friends know what happened, but since they had their phones off, I only received silence when I called. I eased back, debating whether or not to call the police or leave the tent at all. I decided that it wasn't worth it to call the police, as those people had left so quickly. I didn't want to draw too much attention to myself, considering how lucky I was that I was possibly spared. It's around 12:30 by then, when yet another sound came about. I saw a small figure run around my tent into the campsite. I assumed it was the squirrel Dahmer. He's coming back to screw up all our stuff. But moments later, I heard a sound that shook me to my core. It sounded like a mix between a dog and a bear breathing. It was hellish, but it didn't make sense, as the only thing I saw was a small silhouette of what had to be a tinier animal. Nothing that size could manage a sound like that. I prepare my bear spray again, waiting for whatever this was to pass. But that's just it. I began to hear scratching. Then I heard whimpering, but it never went too far away. I'm scared to death of bears, so this has not been my night at all. I then hear a familiar voice call out. It sounded like my friend, only that didn't make sense. He never opened my message or answered my call, and he's not the type to dodge me like that, especially at a time like this. His voice kept coming, kept calling me to leave the tent, but it never said why. But I never answered it. I ignored the voice, still choosing not to believe that any of this was happening. The voice continued for about 10 minutes. Then it sort of dissolved into what I could only make out as a mix between a coyote howl and a human scream. It was 2 a.m. at this point, and I was still frozen in fear. My legs and arms couldn't stop shaking from all the adrenaline. It wasn't long before a new wave of sounds began to assault my tent. But I wasn't going to leave this spot, no matter what. It all finally came to a conclusion around 3 a.m., when a clear figure stood outside my tent again. I froze, not knowing whether it was the creepy men with knives, or whatever that thing was that had been making the noises. It went right up to my tent, but I didn't react. If I did, that could possibly spell trouble. But what struck me about this was, if it was a wild animal, why wasn't it going for our food? Why wasn't it going for the cooler? Why was this figure outside my tent at all? And why was it peering at my tent? I'm panicking in silence, ready to defend myself against my would-be attacker. It lets out an ungodly noise and sort of scurries back into the woods. I was so petrified. I didn't move until sunrise. Once the sun was up, and there hadn't been sounds like that for several hours, I quickly got up and alerted my friends. I told them we did not need to stay here any longer. The oddest part to this day is how we left out food and valuables like idiots, but none of that was touched. Neither the strange men nor the unknown animals wanted any of it. Instead, they were more interested in talking and calling out to us or peering into our tents. I don't think I'll ever understand why any of this happened. My stepdad saved my life from something. From Morgan. When I was younger, between 3 and 11 years old, I lived in a trailer with my stepdad, my mom, and my younger brother. We lived in a very small town in northern Minnesota. There was less than 100 people living there. The center of town was just over a mile away, and we lived around maybe 6 houses. Even so, the area was bordered by a playground, a field of corn, and trees. On the right of our trailer was the back door, which led into a fenced-in area for our dogs, then to even more untold waves of trees. About half a mile down beyond those trees was a cemetery. We were very poor at the time, which is why we couldn't fix a lot of things in our house, even if we needed to, like the door in the back. Not to mention my stepdad was pretty abusive to me. In the middle of the night, I would run away, which was more just sneaking out and hiding under our front porch for a couple of hours, and then sneaking back into my room. At one point when I did it, my stepdad got so mad he broke our porch light. I was 7 at the time. One night was particularly bad. I left the house at midnight. I went under the porch as usual. I was there for half an hour and then tried to go back inside. Little did I know that my stepdad was so mad, he locked me out. This time I was 9 years old, so still that young I began to freak out. I began crying at the door, trying to get it to open. All the lights were off inside, so it was almost pitch black outside, aside from a dim and blinking streetlight. I was still bawling my eyes out when I heard a sound coming from the forest. It sounded like crying. I stopped, thinking that it was my cries echoing or something. But when I stopped, the other cries did not. When I heard them more clearly, they didn't sound like an animal or anything. It sounded like someone had recorded a person crying and played it out in the woods. And honestly, it did sound a lot like me. Panic began to pump through me. I was afraid. I tried the door harder, yanking at the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. I'll just run to my mom's window, I thought. As I was about to, the crying sound drew closer. It was continuously crying, but it was coming towards me now. Slowly the distance closed between me and the thing making the crying noise. I could feel my face becoming hot, even with the tears streaming down my face. The back door, the words popped into my head. The doorknob is broken there. I can get in. I paused for a moment, listening to the sounds. It was speeding up. The crying noise was getting closer by the second. I took the chance. I began to make my way to the other door. I paused before I reached the right side, because the crying sound stopped. This was my chance. It went away, or so I thought, so I booked it to the fence. The latch was stuck. I tried to push it up, and just as it started to slide up, there was a whisper from the tall border of trees no more than 15 feet away from me. I heard its words clearly. "Come here." The words became stretched out and horrifying. It sounded like a very old, slow, distorted sound from a handheld recorder. I pushed the fence gate open and slammed the latch back down, running up our decaying old steps, all 2 of them, and flung open the door. I slammed it shut and pushed a heavy box in front of it. I booked it down the hallway, through the living room, and right into my room. I closed my window quietly, then draped a blanket over it so that nothing out there could see and hear. I turned off all the lights, turned on a movie very softly, and crawled into the top bunk, waiting for the night to be over. The entire night, I could hear walking around the trailer outside, with the occasional muffled whisper saying, "Come here," followed by more crying. "Go away," I wanted to scream at it, but I didn't want it to find me. When the morning came, I told my mom about my stepdad locking me out, but not about what happened after that. "Who the hell do you think you are? She's only 9. My mom screamed at him. He apologized over and over and said he thought I was inside when he locked the door, but I knew he was lying. But my mom gave him the benefit of the doubt again. I stopped sneaking out after that. The following night around 10 p.m., I was sitting in my bed. I could hear some coyotes out towards the cemetery. I fell asleep for a while. I got up later that night around the same time as the previous night. I was going to get a glass of water from the kitchen, then maybe stop by the bathroom. But when I left my bedroom, my stepdad was waiting for me. "Come outside. I want to talk to you." In that situation, I was mortified. I was about to be outside with that thing again, and with my horrible stepdad. We went out to the front porch. I was waiting for the degrading to start, for the butt chewing to begin, but it never did. We stood out there for 10 minutes in silence, watching the stars in the sky. Off in the distance, we could hear the sound of coyotes from before. Only now, they were from the field behind our house. For some reason, though, the sounds weren't exactly the same as before. They were weird now. "That's coyotes. They're hunting something," my stepdad said. I looked up at him and I shook my head. "That doesn't sound like coyotes. It sounds strange." He gave me a knowing look, then sat down on the bench next to where I stood. I looked out towards the field, the coyotes sounding even closer now. I looked back at my stepdad. He seemed so hesitant, like there was something he wanted to tell me, but he wasn't sure if he could. I looked back at the field again. The noises were so close this time. I swear I could hear hooves in the weeds. Why hooves, though? When I saw the pair of red eyes staring at me from the weeds, goosebumps sprouted up on my skin. They were in the exact same weeds where I could hear the coyotes and hooves. I stepped back and audibly gasped. My stepdad looked at me, then put a firm hand on my shoulder, pushing me back towards the door. He got me back inside, then locked the door behind us, then locked it with a chain. He brought me over to the kitchen and said, "Don't ever leave the house at night. It's dangerous out there." What was in those weeds? What kind of animal has red eyes? I started quietly asking and crying at the same time. Then I began to explain what happened the previous night. He pulled me in and hugged me. "When you're older, I'll tell you. Just promise me you won't go out at night again." I just cried and nodded. He brought me into my brother's room and set up a sleeping bag on the floor next to my brother's bed and our dogs. The dogs were on high alert, growling at the blanketed window. I was afraid of what was on the other side. He put on a movie for us, even though my brother was sleeping. Then he went back to the living room, staying up all night, keeping a close eye out. All throughout that night, I could hear the cries of coyotes and some form of growling coming from an unknown animal, an animal I knew could not be a coyote. My stepdad never talked about that night again, so I can safely say I don't think I'll ever know what it was in those woods. But I listened, and I never went out there again after dark. Strange Lights in Rural Pennsylvania, from XX Atroticus XX. When I was 12 years old, my family would often go on road trips around the United States. We loved looking for cool and creepy places to travel to. Somehow, no matter where we were heading, we always managed to find something macabre, like an old cemetery or an insane asylum. My family was weird, I know. On a regular road trip, we would usually visit an allegedly haunted location, stay at an old campground that had been around for ages, and hunt for a well-known cryptid. My friends thought my family was nuts for believing in the paranormal. However, for me, it was just normal. There was a particular road trip I remember, the one that sticks out most in my mind to this very day. It really shows what our family was like back then. We were heading to the Cranberry Run campground in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. It wasn't known specifically as a haunted campsite, but the local newspapers mentioned accounts of strange lights in the sky and people disappearing. My father, being a novice cryptozoologist and paranormal investigator, heard rumors of the area and had scheduled a trip for us on one of our summer vacations. Upon reaching the town of East Stroudsburg, everything seemed completely normal. But after going about half a mile down the road, my father suddenly pulled over. There was a large building in front of us. We stared at it like deer in headlights, although it would be more accurate to say that we stared at what was right behind it, a mountain. I don't remember hearing any sounds at all, not even the traffic passing us by, and it seemed like everything just fell silent in that odd moment. Directly in front of us, one of the mountains was lit up, as though something was beaming a light down upon it. My father, being more scientifically minded, immediately looked ahead on the map to see if there was a road leading up the mountain so we could conduct an investigation. He found one, so we sped off toward the blinding light. My father was so transfixed and concentrated that we passed by a creepy abandoned-looking hotel without a second glance. That was entirely unlike us. I pointed this out to him, but he responded with a disgruntled, "Not now." I immediately shut up and let my father concentrate on his driving. Finally, we found the road that led up the illuminated mountain. At what appeared to be the halfway mark, the concrete turned into a terribly rut-filled dirt road in dire need of some maintenance. As my father continued up the road, now slower to be cautious, my mother and I were tossed around in the car even still. At this point, the road seemed to be more of a sand-type sediment, which was unheard of for a mountain in this area. It didn't even seem to be normal sand. After a few minutes, the car began to slow down until it came to a stop on the mountainous road. The engine would no longer turn over. My dad swore and fumbled with the key. I, on the other hand, was preoccupied with the black figures that suddenly appeared and were standing directly in front of our car. We sat quiet, motionless, until my mother opened the door and stepped out. The second she touched the strange sand-like substance, she immediately passed out, as if it was from the fabled Sandman himself. My father yelled, unbuckling himself so that he could lean between the seats and yank her back into the car. As he slammed Mom's door shut, those black figures pointed behind us, as if threatening us, telling us to leave. Dad then threw the car into reverse, making several attempts to start the car, while I tried to wake my mother up. After a few minutes, the car finally started. We kept a close eye on those strange figures while my dad backed us out of there. Mom only woke up though once we were back on the main road. It took us all a while to process what had happened. It was so bizarre, so terrifying. My mother kept insisting that the beings that we saw had wings, though Dad and I hadn't seen them. I don't feel that they were there to hurt us, just to scare us enough to turn around and never come back. But why didn't they want us up there? Years later, I still believe that it was a warning of sorts. Perhaps there was some unseen danger up ahead, And this was the universe's way of telling us to stop, of warning us not to go in that direction. The black figures only interacted with us when we wouldn't move, and they never did try to approach us, much less harm us. I'm not entirely sure they could. Every now and then I remember that experience. The fright, the awe, the feeling of something more than myself. I finally decided to tell this story because I don't care what anyone says. There are some very mysterious things out there. Some good, some bad, and some you just don't know about. As humans, we don't understand most of the things around us, though we try desperately to. So why should we be so close-minded as to believe that paranormal encounters like this one don't exist? Just remember, if you're heading out to the Cranberry Run campground in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, beware the strange lights and look out for the shadow people. Well, that's the end of this episode, guys. That's the hardest episode I've had to put together, because I am so sick right now it hurts to talk. I need a nice long nap, a 64-ounce tub of chicken noodle soup, and a hot, slightly chocolatey coffee, or I'm gonna be the villain in the next story. Just imagine me all pale and disgusting and sweaty, poking my head into your tent and asking you for a bowl of moist noodles. And when I come asking, you better give me that noodle. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you want your story told, share it with us at darkstories.org or reddit.com/r/darknessprevails. If you want to support the show, you can check the links below. There's a link to my Patreon where you can donate, or a link to my merchandise store where you can get some creepy and cool shirts. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous full episode. Kieran says, do back alley horror stories. That's a good idea. Some very sketchy things go on in the back alleys. I'm not saying I go back there from time to time to pick out the juiciest and tastiest of the cockroaches. But yeah, sketchy stuff. Gato Dogcat says, I thought it said frog, not fog. Well, that could work too, because an unimaginable genius of our time once said, they're turning the freaking frogs gay. And if that don't scare you, I don't know what will. Gage Call says, haven't watched in a while. Time to wake up in the middle of the night again. Ha, you too? I've been waking up to fever dreams for the last several days. Last night I didn't even go to bed because I was tired of sleeping, if that makes any sense. Hotter K88 says, first to be eaten by the monsters in the dark. I hope I taste good at least. Well, the monsters tell me I taste like caramelized onions. Is that a good thing? And Brandon Daniel says, I left the video I was watching to come and see this. I love creepy stories. Ah, another person of culture I see. Tell me, friendo, what video did you leave to watch this one? Was it a meme compilation? It might tell me a lot about your character. Well, that's the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. I gotta go get better so I can make you guys more stories. Well, not make you stories, but read you stories. Anyway, here are the credits to my patrons who continue to donate, because they're just amazing like that. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.